Caligulid, Autumn 937. As the waters of the Aden began to widen, that was when Osrith broke from Edwin and Finoli's company. Her horse, already weary from the 70-mile journey east, now had to move as Osrith dug her heels into its sides. Nostrils flaring, it was away. She did not stop until she got to the ramparts of Caligulid, stone, not wood, an impenetrable, unbreachable barricade which had kept the city, more or less, the sparsely populated continuum it had been since the Romans had built it. Dropping from her horse, her temper up, she ignored the shouts from the prince and the abbot behind her, and the protests from the guards at the gates of that benighted city. Apart from one visit on Constantine's orders, where she had entered from the south, this was only the second time she had passed through the northern gates, that day, heading in, not fleeing out, with Eric Thurgilson, a prisoner, as she had been. The city was not on fire today. But she was still angry and livid that Constantine had chosen to bring Edra down here, to the ancient capital of Finoli. Now Abbot Findel had told her that there was a meeting being held there and, in attendance, the Cymric kings, all 5 of them, including Sindlan, Edwin, who was now behind her and issuing orders to the guards as Osrith furiously covered the ground between the ramparts and the palisade wall. Owain of Strathclyde, and Anlaf of the Norse. Get out of my way, fool! Osrith screamed at the next guard who tried to get in her way. Adrenaline drove Osrith on, and she hit the hapless man about the face with the hilt of her sword. He fell, the way was clear, and she stalked into the courtyard. About her, the citadel looked much was the same as she remembered, and her anger flared, to shield her fear. Edra was here, helpless, and she had been here, also helpless. But why? Why had she been brought from Dunnottar to Caligulid? A scream coming from the scriptorium drew Osrith's attention and she strode to the door. The guard beside it, having seen what had happened to his colleague just before, wisely stepping out of the way. "Why didn't you send for me earlier?" She screamed at the person whose footsteps were echoing hers up the stone steps towards the room. She pushed it open. Edra was at least on her feet and was pacing. A woman was with her. "Osrith, you left," Eswe told her, hovering beside the door, the invisible limit that he refused to cross. "Constantine sent men, warriors. You left, Osrith, as you left Dunnottar." It was then she felt it, the shame from running, and she looked at Edra, sweat drenching her brow in this balmy, autumn season, and felt shame and guilt that she had indeed abandoned the promise that she had made to the land, to Saynid's people. If she had meant it, should she have not accepted Constantine's premise, that she had been abandoned and that another of his kin was to step in to remedy the disgrace of her rejection? "How far?" Osrith asked the girl, amazed by the look of her, wild-eyed, but resigned to the fact that the woman in her charge was in distress. Then she took the girl by her shoulders and looked at her in the face, changing to Cymric. "Have you birthed before?" she asked her, quieter than she felt, and the girl nodded. "A woman?" She shook her head. Osrith inhaled. And, at that moment, Osrith knew why Edra was there. It was because of her. Because she was the landowner and therefore the lady of Caligulid. Under Brehon law, her inheritance from Osrith, mother to daughter, meant she and Anlaf owned the land from at least Strathclyde to Amont Bridge, the old kingdom of Wst, to the coast to the west and to the highlands to the east, bordering Melrose, and the Keld Forest. It was a vast land, an old land, and many people she had known over the years had claimed to the lineage of the Henogled, the people of the Old North. Through the line of Coelhen and King Urien, 3 of them are living as lords and kings, Owain of Strathclyde, Sindlan of Gwynedd and herself, if that counted, as lady of the land of Berwick, which had once been Bernicia, which had once been Gododdine, the Pictish Cymric land adjacent, between the Tuide and the Consit. "Edra," Osrith said to her daughter, in a voice which appeared much calmer than the turmoil in her mind, "I am here for you. Child, I am here." "Mater," Edra gasped, as another birthing pain racked her body. She turned her piercingly blue eyes to Osrith. The terror that had been in them had reduced and instead, familiarity, gratitude that she was there, which made Osrith feel much, much worse. A pain racked through her again, and Osrith supported Edra, wishing with all her will that Elasad was there, midwife, layer out, marriage custom guardian to the Pictish Gael nobility. She would not have let Osrith go in with the dirt of the road on her, and at that thought, she backed away. I will return, Osrith promised, as she pulled the dress from Edra. Her underdress was already soaked in sweat and it clung to her heaving body. She turned to the maid, who was looking at Osrith, wild-eyed. I need to bring someone, they need to bring boiled water and fresh clothing. They need to have, she looked round at the scriptorium. Has this room even been scrubbed with lye? Kept clean? It is a monastery scriptorium, came Eswi's voice from the steps. Of course not. But it is the best that Caligulid has. No, it won't be. Osrith shouted back. She paced to the door, and pushed past Eswi. Watch the maid. Make sure that she keeps walking, Edra. By Christ in heaven, you do it if you have to. She said to Eswi, you are cleaner than I am for a start. I don't want what nearly happened to me happen to her. Not waiting for Eswi to reply, she pushed past him, stamping on all the steps back down the scriptorium tower as if she had a personal grudge against every single one of them. The guard who had moved out of the way of Osrith on the way up did the same on the way down, and she looked left and right, for the stables. Find someone, anyone, Osrith told Finolai, as Abbot Findle came over to her. Osrith, where are you going? The kitchens, she told him. I need to wash my arms in lye. I need boiling water. I need towels. It was at that moment, when another scream came from the tower, that she saw Constantine. He did not seem to see Osrith at first, looking up as he was doing to the tower. Then, he noticed Finolai, and then Osrith, as she dipped into the kitchens. Beside him, Owain stood, watching Constantine watching them. They had been in the midst of a long, protracted discussion. Owain made a mental note to thank Osrith when he next saw her for giving them a break. If Edra lived, he thought to himself, looking up to the window. He had ever liked the girl, and now, they all knew the precariousness of the political situation. Should Edra die, the land would revert back to Osrith. Anlaf would have no legal claim through his wife, and Osrith would have to make some difficult decisions should the alliance be made to hold. Inside the kitchen, the cook was preparing for the midday meal. Food was being prepared, baskets and plates were being stacked. Osrith pushed past all of that to get to the pantry. Take care, Finolai called to her, as he was in the process of stripping off her upper clothing. The cook, who was preparing food for dinner, stopped as he saw Ewari enter his kitchen, and shouted at her in Cymric to leave. Then you condemn the king's daughter to die, she told the man, getting down to her undershirt, which she ripped from her body, to stand part naked in the kitchen as she located Doc from the pantry and threw it into the already boiling water. No, Finolai cautioned the man, as Osrith stirred it, and with a linen cloth which she then soaked in the water, sponged herself all over, before tying the rag into her hair. The cook, who was looking goggle-eyed at her, looked then to Finolai as Osrith went to the pantry and located more linen, which she bound her chest with, not for battle, but for decency, leaving her arms free. Go to her, Finolai urged as another scream penetrated their ears. But Osrith hesitated, remembering the poor servant girl who had given birth at Doia, whom Mary, Constantine's future wife, had birthed with care and humanity, traits which Osrith had not witnessed up to then in the haughty princess of the Allied. Edra had, with Elasad, attended Osrith when she had birthed young Finan. She had been 12 and had handled the matter with the ease of a woman twice her age. Now, Osrith was in her position, and Edra in her mother's, and she was angry with herself for being terrified of the birth, of not being able to come through for Edra if she needed it. Osrith was not trained in midwifery, nor had ever had their will or desire to learn. If she went, if things went wrong. She was at the door of the kitchens, with the pot of water in one hand and linens in another, when another scream came, this one, to Osrith, sounding as if something was going wrong. The maid, who could only be doing her best, but it was clearly not good enough. Osrith turned to Finolai. Find someone, someone who will attend," she told her dearest friend. "We have sent Brother Eardred. He is trained in birth?" Osrith asked, sardonically. "He will pray," he told her. "Finolai," Osrith shouted to him, thrusting her weapons into his hands. "Who do you have? Who is your best?" He shifted before her eyes. "It's me," she told him. "There's nothing you can say that will shock me." "I will bring someone," Finolai promised her, and with that, for her friend had never let her down, Osrith passed the guard on the door, who took the cooking pot from her and followed her up the stairs, pausing when he got to the uppermost door, and put the pot down. Eswe was not there. Indeed, he was not in the birthing room either. The maid, unaware that someone was at the door, was indeed doing her best, her voice low and slow, comforting even Osrith in the panic that was filling her body. Could fail to admire the girl's work, although she clearly knew nothing about birth. Neither did Osrith, though she had birthed young Finan, and rid her body of many more undeveloped children. But that was all she knew, and panic started to come to her chest again. Edra, first child, not aware of what was coming and was in considerable distress. "Has she lost her waters?" Osrith attempted, in Cymric. The girl nodded, as Osrith approached Edra. "Then we must walk her a little, to get the child moving." Edra turned her head and looked across to Osrith. "Mater," she exclaimed, and put out a hand to steady herself as another birthing pain racked her body. "Talk to me, Colleen," she told Edra. "Tell me of normal things, of Dunotter, of Selark, of young Finan." "He is ... he is not here," Edra gasped. "He ... is with you, or you did?" Osrith nodded, and inhaled to steady herself. Of course, he had gone north, but may well have missed Constantine. He would be heading back, or maybe to hear if he had heard where the meeting of king and lords was happening. "Malcolm is married," Edra went on, pushing through with another contraction. "Cara Lane lives at Dunotter now. Selark, Constantine's son, with them. So, young Finan would have someone to meet him when he got there," she thought. But, of course, he would not. Malcolm and Selark would be here. The armies she saw when she arrived would be heading south. This, then, was one last conference before the big push against Ethelistan, and she knew as well that it wasn't just Edra that was important here. A battle was going to happen, whether she wanted it to or not. The Morrigan chose that moment to remind Osrith. She knew it in her heart. So what happened next might determine how many lived and how many died. At the door were two figures. Osrith may not have noticed them unless the maid had backed away. Eswe called to her, and Osrith turned round. "Abbot Findle told me to tell you he has someone." His voice was thin, nervous, and Osrith looked to him, and then to the figure beside him. The woman was clearly a heathen and took no trouble to disguise her faith, and Osrith knew immediately who the pagan was. "Can you help, Haf?" For it was clearly the young woman Osrith remembered. Long-haired, dressed in a simple woven cloth, she looked little different to many women of her age. But there was an air about her, like Bark, like Ulla, like even Beetha, the healer from Irian, to whom Osrith had gone for herbs to help reduce her monthly bleeding, to remove a child. Haf had had a thing for Osrith. When she had first come to Caerligulid, when she thought she was a boy, Haf had kept her fed when she had been imprisoned by Abbot True for rebelling against the agreed arranged marriage at Guthard. Haf had married a Norseman by the name of Galma, and by now, a similar age to Osrith. She must be a grandmother by now, like Osrith was about to become. And between them, Osrith refusing the urge to reel away from the blood and the pain, and bone-aching effort, helped Edra bring forth a daughter. The maid had gone to obeying Haf, whose father still worked in the kitchens, and ferried hot water and linens up to Edra, and Haf had given the girl strict instructions about what was to happen next. The lady was not to be left, that she and the girl and Osrith were going to tend her postpartum. 88,888,888. When Edra slept that night, the babe beside her, the maid sitting watch, and Haf returning to her home outside the citadel, just for a few hours to put my affairs in order, she explained to Osrith, and told her that her husband, the Norseman, and her children, of which she had 4, all had children of their own. Osrith stood on the other side of the tower and breathed. Edra was safe, both she and her daughter lived, and the maid was going to ensure absolute cleanliness to prevent any chance of childbed fever or any other illnesses and maladies that might occur now the child was there. The night was warm, and still, and Osrith breathed the air as if she had been deprived of it for several hours. It took a hand to Osrith's bare shoulder to realize that she was standing close to the inner chapel entrance, and the coldness on her flesh made her jump. It was Constantine, and Osrith blinked a few times so her brain could register that it was really him. "You are wanted, by High Will of Deheubarth," Constantine told her. "High Will of the Cymric." "High Will?" Osrith repeated, still feeling dazed, and fighting for the urgency to see what he meant. He looked her up and down. "Edra lives," she told him. "Anlaf has a daughter." At this, she saw some of Constantine's facade move, relief filtering over his features. "Did she have to come here?" "Osrith, the situation between the kings is delicate. One negotiation here, another there, and the alliance will fall apart." He looked to the southern gate. "We are poised on the edge of action. When the time is right, before the end of the fighting season at least, we will move on Aethelestan and fight him at a place of our choosing." "You will be the aggressor," Osrith told him. "You will be the invader. We are launching a counter-offensive." It was Aethelestan who chose to invade. He moved his hand to her shoulder again, his touch light, his fingers cold. "You should dress." Osrith looked to his hand and then to his face. Dear Constantine, with whom she had spent a lifetime fighting as a dog and a cat might fight, who hated one another and played cruel tricks, who wound her up so much that she yielded to his tricks, yielded to his body. "I will have Eswe fetch you warrior clothes," he told her. "You were her mother today, that babe you brought, begging for Domhnall's hospitality. You fought to secure the life of a child, out of so many children who are orphaned, recognizing that she needed safety. You." Constantine leaned over and kissed her forehead. "You were that one person who I grew to abide, when I abided no one, impetuous, stubborn, strong-willed. I am sorry you felt you were left with no choice but to flee. I did not explain myself clearly about your marriage." Domhnall. He looked across the courtyard, to the hall which he had clearly left. Two languorous guards marching slowly from one side of the hall door to the other. "You must consent to this, of course, in order for the marriage to the Allied warrior to be ended." Osrith turned to Constantine, and threw her arms around him. He had hated her, and wound her up, hit her and starved her and tricked her into standing outside in the freezing cold when she had displeased him. The embrace was only for a moment, but it was raw with emotion, for their daughter, raised together, at Dunnottar, Edra, rescued from Wessex's Thyra died. Then Osrith stepped back, warrior once more. "If I felt that in any way Finan had dishonored me, I could think of no one I would be wed to than Domhnall. I know that he did not make the offer lightly, and it is more than I could ever be worthy of. And yet here, in the eyes of all at Caerleguilid, who followed the Brehon law, despite being, nominally, Northumbrian, they were married." Osrith smiled. "And the old lands of St would have a new lady, after Edra, her daughter. Osrith's granddaughter would inherit the lands from her, directly from Gwyddolf, who, presumably, had them handed down to her through the female line since the law began. Osrith was Cymric, here, in this citadel. Her marrow told her that she was in the right place. The Morrigan told her her birthright was amongst the people of Caerleguilid, of those people descended from the pagan tribes of Britons, who had embraced the first Christianity, the Irish Church. "When you are dressed, come to the hall. The lords wish to speak to you." High Will Epshley. 88,888,888. But she was not announced as a warrior. Neither was she announced as the Lady of Berwick or the Lady Edra's mother, or a Gale, or even a Bernician Angle. It was the Prince of Gwynedd, Sindlin, standing beside Owain of Strathclyde, who crossed the flagstone floor and crossed to her. He bowed. "The Queen of the Hen-Ogledd." "Gwyddolf, Gwyddolf!" came the cry, from all of the leaders, kings and lords in the hall. "Lady, walk with me, to the center. Take your place on the throne of Rhysht, the first monarch of these lands in 500 years." And to his side came his cousin, Owain, now king of Strathclyde, once grandson of the last king, Anarod. Both stood either side of her, flanking her as she looked around the hall. A place had been made for her, a chair in the center of the hall, and Osrith, against her better judgment, walked with the two princes. Around the perimeter of the hall were sitting many lords and kings. The two empty chairs at the back of the hall were presumably Sindlan's and Owain's. There were other lords and kings she knew, Edwin, who had accompanied Finolai, who were standing beside one another, Rodri and Owain, both Hywel's sons, both kings in their own right. Domhnall stood beside Constantine, and on the other side of the king of Alba was Anlaf, tension on his face, although Osrith was not entirely sure that it was because of the negotiations. And Guthfrith, he, too, was there, Sigtrygg's brother, presumably to resume his kingship in Ofoik when whatever deal had been arranged could be carried out, with Anlaf, presumably, occupying the lands south of Owain's, and to Amont Bridge, a nice, tidy parcel of land thanks to Edra. Thanks to Osrith. Caerligwylid was chosen for its neutrality, then. No king ruled here. Guthred, her supposed husband, once, Gisla's brother, had been the last. Abbot Findel, Finolai, managed the citadel for its own sake, surrounded as it was by anxiously ambitious men. So this neutral space had been chosen, and would be needed, knowing how the discussion had gone at Elenvanin. Anlaf's stronghold would have been forceful, effortful, exhausting. They were discussing the very existence of their kingdoms and the men and families they were committing, depending on the action they agreed to that day. And, presumably, one of those actions was to bring Osrith to the citadel where her ancestors had ruled and had reigned. It was no coincidence that not one man amongst them stood further forward or higher up than another. They were waiting for her. "Will you wish to speak to me?" Osrith said to the king of Cymric. "I would speak pivotally, lady," Hywel told her. "There are no secrets here," Osrith told him, "and them all. I was brought here for a purpose, and I can guess what that purpose is. Whatever you wish to say should be heard by all." Hywel looked to his left and to his right, to his sons, and then stepped forward. "As you wish, lady," he told her. "I say this: you should give up the land, and its titles, everything that you hold on this land." Hywel's voice was firm, and fair. "I will tell you, as I have told all here, I am no longer on the side of Aethelstan. We are no longer allies, for he would take my land, and the land of everyone who stands before me now." He nodded to the leaders before him. "For we are decided, we have been decided for a long time through our alliance, that every Anglish and every Saxon person on this isle of ours, this island of Britain, should be driven back to the sea." It was a popular argument, one which brought cheers and applause. So, Osrith thought, it was decided all that long time ago, when Edra and Anlaf married, to feign cordiality with Aethelstan, make him reveal his hand, which he did, giving time to strengthen and reinforce. Nothing short of genocide was now good enough. "Then, I can assure you, King Hywel," Osrith replied, making sure that everyone in the hall heard her, "that I understood my queenship to be an honorary position. My land is Edra's, my daughter's, and, now she has a daughter of her own, in time, it will be hers." "Yet," she added, still standing before the throne and not taking it, for she would never sit and claim it before anyone, "I do have claim of the queenship of Caerligwylid. This land abides Brehon law, and abided it before Saxons imposed their own kings borrowed from Ofoik. It is under this system that I was made to be the queen of Cumbraland and Halligwithicland. If such places exist, I reject this title, for it was forced upon me. It was such recorded in the monastic records that I was lawfully married to King Guthred, so I was, lawfully, his queen. I reject all claims I have on the land here, whether known as Cumbraland, Northumbria, and the Henogled. Nothing," Osrith added to them all, "would compel me to claim any land," she added, ensuring she had said this clearly, and not only in Gaelish, but Cymric, English and Norse. There was silence. Everyone was still, and Osrith looked at their faces. As she had the audience, Osrith went on to claim what she was going to do next. I will remain with my daughter until such a time I can travel back to my land for Blood Month and to assist with the land at Berwick. Here, she looked to Constantine. Bean is next after Senid, and at her dead husband's name a gasp came to her throat which she quickly dashed away. And he is stewarding the land. For it had been Chaltigar who had come to see her, before Osrith left. He never asked her feelings but he did that day. What would you have me do? He had asked Osrith. These are your people. I am meant to lead you but I am no Pict, she told him, and when he had asked what she intended to do when she finally found young Finan, told him, fight, if he would fight. But I will try to make him see that he should not. Osrith had paced before her land manager. Too many men will die when Aethelstan and his allies meet Constantine and his. I am going for myself, Chaltigar, Osrith had added. Who is next to rule here after me? After Senid? Bean, and it turned out Bean was Senid's great-nephew, grandson of Senid's brother. And, ceremonially, Chaltigar had helped her dress for battle. Her mail was Anglish as her father, her undershirt linen, Cymric, hair no-bled, her mother. She was Gaelish, King Domhnall had declared her so and she had won a victory. Winning acclaim in the eyes of Eric Thurgilson had earned her the Norse title of Kriegik Vind, her jewel, although little Olenna had it now and she was West Saxon due to her service with Odda, Mercen too, for Ethliad and Ethelfled and Aethelstan. And if she were to accept Constantine's accommodation for her marriage, Uineel. She had enough reasons to fight on either Constantine's side or Ethelstan's and still, as she set off, harvest fine and the cycle of autumn beginning, Osrith still did not know whose side, in the end, that she would fight on. But now she did. Now she knew exactly what she must do. Constantine always won, in the end, and Osrith should know by now never to fight him. And I accept the kind and considerate arrangement you have come to, after much effort and grace, King Constantine, Osrith concluded, turning first to Owain and Sindlan, and nodding to them. If you wish me to represent the interests of the Old North, I will so, and gladly, for they are that of my mother's line. However, I will involve myself in no politics. Such things you must deal with yourselves. She turned back to Constantine and now walked away from the old northern throne. You arranged that, through the rejection of the marriage you approved for me nearly 20 years before by my husband, Finan, in the service of my brother, Eutard of Bibbenberg, for my reputation to be restored. She then rested her eyes on Domhnall. Prince Domhnall, of the Northern Irian, Lord of Doir and Armadka, Kells and Tara, you so gracefully chose to put aside your titles to save me from shame. I come to tell you, Osrith paused for a moment, the light in her mind that she kept lit for Finan closing with a prayer that he would forgive her, that I accept. All that I am I give to you, that I would be sheltered by you, as you dower wife, under the ancient Brehon laws. Osrith did not register the applause, the cheering, the approval of the lords there. She would ask Constantine that there be no ceremony. Not in Caerligwylid, nor anywhere else, just that what he had agreed in fact had done not 3 years before came to pass. Constantine asked her just then to confirm what she said, and he declared it before them and Osrith stepped away from politics and into retirement as a dowager lady, with Domhnall, nominally, now, as her husband. He would confirm that she understood all that went with the position, and that, with her husband's approval, she could return to Berwick. And that was all that Osrith wanted to hear, that Berwick could be, once again, her home, and she its lady. Domhnall said nothing to her before she left, dismissing herself from the battle discussions as she did so, and watched her retreat towards the door of the hall at Caerligwylid until it closed behind his wife.